Here's something you don't see every day. Stay with me, guys. We'll talk about it. Hi gang, Rob here. It's the evening of 12 November 2013 and I've got one for you tonight from the Sharpening bench that I think is a little bit interesting. Looks a little familiar but a little different, doesn't it? One of my subscribers, James, TheLanWoo's, wrote me, I don't know, maybe a month or so ago about doing a little work on his grandfather's knife, and he told me what it was, and I assumed the wrong thing first. He said it's a Ranger LB 125, and I thought, well, surely he means the Buck 112 Ranger, the smaller version of the 110. And I thought, but why would he put the LB in there? I don't know what that means. So I did a little research, and then became familiar with a knife company and a model of knife that I wasn't familiar with at all. This is indeed the Ranger LB 125. Let's see if we can get a shot of that tang stamp for you. These knives produced by the Colonial Knife Company, I believe starting in the mid-70s or so, and actually they continue up to today. First, a little history. I'll share it with you, and it's new history to me. The Colonial Knife Company started in 1926 in Providence, Rhode Island by the Pantoliano brothers, a company that churned out lots of knives, mostly fixed blades, some folders too, all through the 20th century. Their bread and butter, so to speak, especially in the later half of the 20th century, was contract knives. Smith & Wesson, Winchester, all kinds of promotional knives. Also, they were a large supplier to the U.S. government, the GSA, General Services Administration, and the military. This particular model, you don't have to think too hard about what segment of the market this thing was aimed at, do you? One of many 1970s vintage knives from other American manufacturers that were aimed squarely at the market segment of the legendary Buck 110. It's pretty much the same size. 5-inch handle, 3 5/8 inch clip point blade, opened with a nail nick. This particular vintage of the Ranger is flat ground from about 3/4 breadth down. Current models, and yes, this knife is still made, and still made in the United States, by the way, and can be had for about $25 online. Current models are hollow ground. These older ones were made of 440A, almost stainless steel, I would call it. Current models are 440C, so better steel, and from what I can tell from pictures, a little better machining. Let's talk about some construction differences, though, in this knife versus the Buck 110. I think it was sort of a chain store knife. Maybe Montgomery Ward's, Kmart, that kind of thing. It is completely steel in its construction. The frame is steel, and you can see the stacked backspacer. Not super well finished, and that sort of fills the void where the lock bar stops. The bolsters are also steel, And there's a little bit of an interesting story behind that. There was a period, I think earlier in the production of this knife, where they they said they marketed the knife as having nickel silver bolsters, and well, as a matter of fact, many of them at one point in the in its production run, many of the bolsters started to develop what looked like bubbles. Well, there's a reason they had bubbles, because they were steel bolsters and they were plated. I think this knife might be from an era shortly after that problem was discovered and corrected, because these are steel bolsters, probably stainless, and they're sort of looks like some kind of an epoxy coating, and they're black, of course. The handles on these earlier and mid-run models are saw-cut Delrin. Delrin is a sort of an older type of plastic, and I don't know if the camera's picking this up very well, but you can see the saw-cut nature of the handle, and then as they taper down toward the bolsters, they're sanded and polished so they smooth out. As you can tell, the pins are brass, and it's a pretty standard lockback knife, isn't it? With the with the release button portion of the lock bar all the way at the back of the knife. Definitely a two-hand opener, two-hand closer. If you try to let gravity do the work for you, it just doesn't quite do it. And I guess it doesn't relock after you let go, but it needs two hands to close. For instance, the case shark tooth or case Mako shark knives, those knives, when you release the lock button, that blade will drop dead vertically, and then you can just sort of swing around and finish it all with one hand. These knives don't do that. The Buck 110s don't either. Quality of construction on this thing, well, you know, I guess I would equate it to I guess to Schrade or Camillus, just not quite finished to the level of a Buck 110 or even a case shark tooth. You know, pretty big gaps between the Delrin and the bolsters, and obviously the liners and backspace are just, you know, they're not sanded flush after assembly. They're just kind of all cut out and stacked together and riveted and shipped. But it's a pretty strong old knife, I gotta say. Don't know what the coating was on this blade. I don't know if they were just coating the blade to make it match the coated bolsters, or if there was some objective for corrosion protection. I did find a couple spots. There's one right here. Don't know if you can see that, but a little bit of corrosion there. And as you can see, this knife has been well used and had some scratching going on during previous attempts to sharpen. And I think James kind of wanted this knife preserved. It was a gift, I believe, from his grandpa, and it was in pretty rough shape just from an operations standpoint when I got it. It was, I think there was a lot of rust and crud in the pivot, and you know, I've just spent a few days with it, lubricating it, cleaning it out, and it's definitely a lot smoother than it was when it came to me. And the blade was, you know, it had been freehand sharpened and probably not the best sharpening jobs done over the years, and it needed a lot of work. But the steel being soft enough, it didn't take me hours to achieve what I think is a pretty good edge. I didn't want to do too much to this knife, and I kind of tried to tell James that before he sent it to me. I didn't want to remove this coating because it's original to the knife and it shows the character of its use. And the blade's not really damaged. There's just some scratching in the coating and in the surface of the blade. And, certainly nothing that's ever going to affect its function. And these old battle scars, I think, are kind of important to keep. Also, I really wasn't confident that I would have been able to remove the coating up here in the ricasso area without really getting into the bolsters and the liners, and I just didn't think it was a good idea. So I did my best to make it work as well as it can for what it is and put a good edge on it that James will be happy to get out and look at and maybe cut some paper with. And speaking of cutting paper, let's just see if this thing will cut after it has visited me. And of course, tonight we're using the ultra limp, rather fibrous Natchez Shooter's Supply catalog paper. Let's see what we got. Ooh. James, if you're watching, don't think you've ever seen your old knife do this before, have you? All right, time to quit playing around. There we go. Well, that is how it's going to come back to you, my friend. I hope you like it. I've had fun working on it and learning about an old company. Interesting turn of events over the years for Old Colonial. As with most middle-sized American knife companies who wanted to stay afloat, they had to produce knives in volume and they had to do it cost competitively. So part of Colonial was actually sold to the employees, and they formed Colonial Cutlery International. Actually, I think the whole company was purchased in a buyout by the employees. Colonial Cutlery International is the corporation, and there are essentially two divisions: the imported knives, so the ones made overseas in China, and then Colonial Knives proper, which are the American versions. And I was on their website today. They still seem to be pretty vital. They feature some pretty famous designers like Blackie Collins, and they got a line of tactical stuff, a line of bushcraft stuff, and a pretty interesting company that I knew virtually nothing about until a week ago. So thank you, James, for the opportunity to learn something and for the opportunity to work on your heirloom knife. Hope you like it. So grace to you and peace, my friends. And remember, the word and TheLanWoo's Ranger LB125 are sharp.